Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. It's me and Mike here again. Welcome back, everybody.
What's up, y'all?
Hey, so I don't know if you've noticed, Mike, but one of the things I've noticed a lot lately going around my social media feed is like the idea of general purpose rifles. Have you been seeing a lot of that
Yeah.
going around too? Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, everything goes through fades and fads and stuff like that.
right. So
Mhm.
for those the uninitiated, a GPR, general purpose rifle, basically kind of your do-it-all rifle, right? The one rifle that like crap has gone going down. You don't know what you're getting into. You want to be the most prepared as possible, so you're going to have one rifle that can kind of do it all, a little bit of everything.
If you will. Yeah.
Right. One thing I've seen with this is kind of two schools of thought. Is that one, you should have a rifle that can do a little bit of everything, right? A jack of all trades. The other
And
argument of
and
that, go ahead.
what I've seen, well, where I'm gonna kind of interject on that one is that not just can do everything, but can do everything decent.
Yes, right? It can do a pretty good job at a lot of things. Versus the other argument, the opposing camp generally tends to be specialized rifles, meaning having certain rifles for certain tasks. The idea that like maybe you've got an 8.5 inch 300 blackout is a CQB rifle. You have a 20 inch, Mark 12 build as a distance shooting rifle, and then maybe you have something drum mag, light, super light trigger, or like a force reset as like a poor man's RBK. So
Yeah.
different jobs for different guns.
Yeah.
I've seen
Especially with
this a
the
little bit.
rise of the rise of the 16-inch barrel again, dude. The
Yeah,
16-inch barrel again popping off. I've heard people say it's the death of the Mark 18, the death of the CQB rifle kind of deal, but I don't think so.
yeah, I do think it is kind of funny that we see these trends. I mean, I remember when everyone was like, everyone has to have a 10.5, and we all went out
Mark
and built
18,
air.
yeah.
Yeah, we
If
all
you
went.
don't have a 10.5, you're gonna die in CQB, and a 16-inch barrel is impossible to move around a room.
Yeah, we all came up with these ideas of like, oh, we gotta have the Mark 18 and stuff like that. And I love like it was all centered around like, oh, otherwise you're gonna die during CQB, as if like Marines hadn't gone into Fallujah with 20-inch
Yeah,
M16 A4s, you know,
20-inch fucking yeah.
right? Just bayonets attached, hoping for the best. Um, but yeah, so like we've seen that. I remember after that there was the huge like, oh, should you get a 13.9 or 14.5? And people were dying on that hill of a matter of zero point 0.6 inches barrel length.
Ballistics.
Yeah, they're like 14.5, 13.9. You're like, no one cares, you know. And they're like, oh, if you have a 16-inch barrel, you're retarded. Look at the ballistics and
Yeah,
blah blah blah. And it's like there's so much little difference between like 13.9, 14.5, and 16, realistically speaking. Like it doesn't
yeah,
effing matter, and unless like, people are like, oh, well, if I shoot this type of load out of this barrel length, it's like, dude, if you're super autistic into this, like we are, that makes sense. For your average person, they're not like, oh, I only shoot 62 grain or 72 grain, whatever, like loads. They're just like, have 5.56 will travel, right?
yeah.
It's just
And like
whatever box I grab.
the shit makes me laugh so hard because they act like even though like they're like, oh, 10.5 like ballistic standards, it's just ass, it's dog shit. I've known a lot of people that have been killing people for a long time in the desert with a 10-inch barrel, and they've been doing just fine.
Yeah, I always love the fact when people are like, oh yeah, the ballistics of this, and like you're just not going to do what you need to do. And it's like, dude, a bullet's a bullet.
Yeah,
Like
you're getting
it
shot, homie.
at the end of the day, it's a hole punch and your body is a balloon. Like,
Yeah,
your
like
body is a water balloon and that thing is poking holes. Regardless, it's gonna poke holes.
I don't give a shit any reason why. If it's a 10-inch barrel over a 16-inch barrel, dude, getting shot is getting fucking shot.
Yeah, I mean, like, look at it this way, right? If you get hit by a truck at going 20 miles an hour, or you get hit by a truck by 60 miles an hour, you still got hit by a truck.
Yeah,
It still sucks. Like, obviously,
yeah.
one sucks a little bit worse, but they both really suck. But yeah, so you have these kind of arguments back and forth. Mark 12 builds were super big. Then everyone was making blood diamond ARs, and then now the newest thing I've seen is like the light squad weapon. And so
Mhm.
a lot of argument for the specialization thing. I think instead of looking at it from a either or perspective, it should be looked at similar to the way that we did like our Minuteman logistics and our Minuteman militia guerrilla video,
Yeah.
our audio podcast deal, because I think it's more based less on um less on like you have to have one or the other, and more on like the number of people you have. And
Yeah.
my reasoning for that is, so if you're an individual, right, if it's just you, a general purpose rifle is probably better than having like four different rifles that do different things. Not saying that you
Yeah.
can't do that, not saying that that's not, a bad thing to have, but you can only walk around with one reasonably, right? So, for me, like my general purpose rifle is a 16-inch. It's suppressed. I've got a light on it, iron sights, offset red dot, and a 1-6. I can do a little bit of distance. I can, shoot at targets up close. I've got some backup irons. I can see in the dark at the bare minimum with a white light. I can suppress it. I can unsuppress it. Got a decent sling. I can do a little bit of everything, right, with this. That being said, it's not going to do everything well, right? It'll do most things okay. It's not going to be like the perfect CQB rifle. It's a 16-inch barrel with a suppressor. It's going to be a little big, right? So you have to maneuver around that. It's not going to be the perfect Mark 12. It's got a 16-inch barrel, so it's not going to have that ballistic advantage of, the extra 2 to 4 inches for an 18 to 20-inch barrel. But it's
Yeah.
going to be able to, punch out far enough that I need it to. So I can do a little bit of everything with it. Plus, again, if I'm by myself, I don't know what I'm getting into, and I need to be able to do a little bit of everything. If
Yeah.
my, and so if that's a red dot magnifier combo for you or whatever, like it's going to be based around your needs and your environment. If you live in an area with large, wide open spaces, maybe that general purpose rifle has a little bit higher magnification glass to reach out and touch somebody at a distance. Maybe, you live in a more urban environment where that's not necessarily the case of what you're concerned about. So you've got a red dot magnifier combo, to red dot for up close and magnifier if you need it out to distance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all very, very case dependent.
And I feel like a lot of it too, again, is based on how many people you have, right? If you start getting a group together and you all have general purpose rifles, you can all do a little bit of everything. But now that you have a few more people, I feel like that's where the specialization really comes into play.
Yeah, that's when you need to start breaking it down, seeing where people can. Hey, man, you need to be a long distance guy because you're really
Right.
good at it,
Like,
Or hey, man,
the
you're a
shot
pretty
we
big
have.
guy, you're pretty strong.
Right.
Let's make you the gunner.
Yeah.
It's just
Like maybe
yeah,
you've got a dude who he's got a bunch of D60s. He's got a bunch of the Magpul D60s. He's got a bunch of magazines. Everyone else can carry an extra one for him. You're like, you know what, dude? You are going to be the machine gunner. You're just killer at it. And so you make him the machine gunner. He's able to just run that gun all day long. And you got another dude. He's the best shot you got. That's your guy that you're like, all right, you're the designated marksman, man. You can,
yeah,
hit the wings off a gnat's ass at 500 yards. You're our designated marksman. And so on and so forth for whatever special roles you have. If you guys are going to do CQB or whatever, like maybe it would be nice to have a CQB set up, but you don't necessarily need it right off the bat. Again, with that too, more tailored to the people who are in groups when it comes to specialized weapons. Uh, I know I have some weapons that are kind of I've set up like that to be more specialized for certain tasks. But if you're looking at it in a group setting, best shot.
yeah,
Maybe there's somebody else who is. You got to make that decision to, okay, does he just use our gun that's set up for him, right? Or do we make it a group asset? Like how do we address this idea now of like a group mindset that of who gets what, you know?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
maybe everyone has general purpose rifles, right? In theory, in this scenario, and now you're like, cool, we want to add a machine gunner. Well, I'm the one that's got the machine gun loadout. I own it, but maybe I don't want to be the machine gunner. The other guy we've designated as being a machine gunner. So does that mean
Or hey, let's just take this. All right, two people are equally as good at being a machine gunner, but one guy's better at land nav. You
right?
know?
Or there's like you said, you come into it and you either one as a group fund the purchasing of this item, right? That you're going to use, either your DMR or your machine gunner or your whatever, right? You need to address those questions ahead of time of like, hopefully at this point you've built trust if you're putting money in together, but you've got to address those questions ahead of time of like, if this is a group asset, who gets ownership of the asset? Like someone has to fill out the paperwork, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then it becomes a matter of like, this has to live at somebody's house. So what happens if somebody moves or if somebody sells it or if something happens? Like, how do we ensure that the money we poured into this asset doesn't just poof and disappear?
Yeah.
It's like you're not gonna have any legal recourse. It's like, oh great, you gave your buddy a couple $100 so he could go down and buy a gun. Sick. You're not getting your money back. You know what I mean? Like, like good
Also,
luck.
if you bring that up to the police, that might be a really sketchy
Exactly.
topic. Yeah.
Exactly. So trust is a big part of this, right? So like what I'm saying is like, don't just day one meet somebody and be like, let's go spend $2,000 together and get us a, poor man RBK. Build that trust first. But another thing wrong with having those specializations, I think those are a huge part of it, of like a group dynamic. But I think it's one of those things, again, you kind of got to look at it to where like, yeah, if the guy has a Mark 12 build already, sweet. He can be the DMR guy. But
or if he's absolute, I've met people that are absolute dog shit though.
That's true.
You have to be realistic.
Because that's going to be the other thing too, is like, what assets do you have as a group and where are they best suited? Right. That's where the specialization argument, I think, gets a little bit more complicated over the general purpose rifle, which I think the way I look at it is like a general purpose rifle should be a stepping stone and starting point for everybody. That you should have one rifle that's just ready to do a little bit of everything. Barrel length and the accoutrement you want to put on there is entirely based on what you feel the threat that you'd be facing would be. But when it comes to specialization, I think there's a lot of arguments to be made for it. I think like there's nothing wrong with having any of these. I think having like even have like an AR-10 setup as like a DMR or TQB rifle, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
These become assets to a group, and they're just more tools in the toolbox. But it becomes a matter of who has them, who needs them, and how do we distribute them?
Yeah.
And if how do we distribute them and how do we ensure that, like, for example, if it is a group asset, if we all say, it'd be super cool if we had this machine gunner loadout and we all come together and figure it out. Who decides whose that is at the end of the day? How do you figure that out? And I know it's one of those things that can be kind of complicated, but these are questions that need to be answered. Similar to our logistics video where we talked about, hey, if you've got food and water stored as for a group, where do you store it? Do you store it at Bob's house and everyone just hope that you get to Bob's house? Do you use a centralized location? What happens if Bob starts dipping into the stores? These are things I think that people got to think about when it comes to that specialization role. But I don't think there's necessarily a wrong way of thinking either way, one way or the other.
Yeah.
I just think that it's when it comes down to it, I look at it more of like a stepping stone, right? Is like your first thing, in my opinion, should be general purpose rifle, right? Then if you're going to build out other rifles, then start seeing like what roles do we need to fill? Let's look at like the light squad weapon, like the poor man's RPK. Can you realistically field one? First off, is it a matter of having the ammunition capacity, having the proper barrel, having the things that you need to make it worth it? Can you get a force reset trigger or something along those lines, or maybe a super, super light trigger to make that easier? Are those things accessible to you? If not, maybe the DMR route's a better way to go. Maybe, getting a slightly longer barrel, putting some glass on your rifle, or even just having it separate upper, something like that, to where you could run it that way. Because that's the other thing too, is it doesn't have to necessarily be a complete rifle, which I think could solve some of the logistical issues. Is if you have the uppers that you can swap out. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the gist of the argument with that is, I see this kind of go back and forth a little bit. Is like, oh, I've got this, this is my CQB rifle, or this is my whatever. And it's like, well, that's sick. But like, if you grab your CQB rifle and you walk out in a scenario where you don't need to be doing CQB,
which most of the time you will, no one will be.
Yeah, like you're going to run
it very fast.
Exactly. Like I can't remember who the guy was, his name off the top of my head, but I was watching this YouTube video. The dude was a special forces operator who was in Iraq, and he was talking about the first time they went out with their loadout, they had stuff centered around CQB. They had shorter barrel rifles, EOTech red dots, and they're going, through a city. Well, cities are generally built on grid patterns, which meant even though you're in an urban environment, there are long stretches of straight road that go all the way down. Think of whatever major city is near you, right? Whoever's listening, whatever, especially if you're in the States, uh, most of us build on grid patterns. There are vast majorities of cities. You can stand in one spot of the city and look all the way down for miles down one stretch of road, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might be like, oh yeah, we're going to be doing, building like fighting in buildings. So you bring a this, super sturdy rifle. Well, that long stretch of road has buildings that had people can fire back from that are hundreds of yards away, or further.
And they can see you. They have mounted machine guns.
Exactly. So now your CQB rifle maybe is not best fitted to that. One of the things that this guy talked about was he was saying that, their first time going out, that's exactly what they had. It was these long straightaways, right? And bad guys were in the buildings at the end of these straightaways and were hitting them from a lot farther than they could hit back or could reasonably see because of their optic setup, right? Because again, they were geared towards going into this as a CQB fight. So they had a hell of a time. The second time they went out, they switched over to 14.5s with magnified optics and offset red dots.
Yeah.
And the idea being now we have the capability to hit both close and far. We have a general purpose rifle. We can do a little bit of everything. Now, I don't have to excel at distance shooting or have one guy that's necessarily set up for that. That would be
fact that I can see them now. Yeah.
Right. It would be ideal to have specialists, but if you don't have that, at least having general purpose capabilities allows everyone to be on the same field, right? And that was kind of his argument, was like, when you don't know what you're getting into, and in some cases even when you do, if you haven't completely thought it out, you can get yourself into a crappy situation really fast because your cool guy set up, not something that's practical.
Yeah. It's a situation that's so hard to fight on that one too, because like you could sit here and be like, well, I can have this situation all the time and I can have this situation all the time, because like, let's say the same thing, we take the city. Some city avenues I have seen are very congested and you will not see anybody for long distances. Everyone's going to be right next to it. It's going to be really close. So I mean, people will combat the whole thing all the time though.
Right. And again, I think it comes back to, as much as everyone wants a clear answer one way or the other. I mean, that's the whole reason why we watch these videos, right, on YouTube, is some expert that has more experience than we do give us a definitive answer. It always comes down to, depends on your environment and depends on your scenario. So be a free thinker, but also, nothing wrong with having more tools.
Taking some insight. Yeah.
That being said, when it comes to distance, I think that there is a lot to be said for the need and desire for people to, especially in the civilian Minuteman style role, to learn how to shoot accurately at distance. And by that, I mean past 500 yards.
Impossible, dude. 500 yards, you're asking too much of me. First of all, I didn't shoot that with irons back in Nam, so I can't. I didn't get the medal.
That's my favorite boomer thing ever, is whenever they're like, "Oh, we shot irons 500 yards." Okay. Sweet.
I have this magnified optic where I can literally see you pick your ass at 560 yards.
Yeah. Be like, I can do that now too, but I can do it way easier because I have glass.
I can actually see what I'm not even a marksman.
But no, I think there's a big case to be made for civilians learning to, or anyone who wants to live like the kind of Minuteman style, whatever you want to call whatever we are, to learn how to do distance shooting, and to whatever weapons platform you're running, to learn how to maximize the effectiveness of that thing at range, or to get into longer range distance shooting. And I think the big as much as I just spent talking about like a light squad weapon or poor man's RBK, which I think is a dope concept, I think it's really hard for a lot of people to make that materialize, especially in a lot of people's training groups, and even
Yeah.
harder to employ practically without a lot of practice. So I think that when it comes to that, if you can't have the idea of armor welding, as close to automatic fire as possible as for fire superiority, you have to rely then on distancing. So if you can have one or more people who can engage the enemy at an extended distance,
And just keep them pushed.
exactly, and keep them at that distance while your guys can maneuver, that offers a sense of fire superiority in a different aspect. Um, I think learning how to shoot out to 1,000 or even further is a huge skill that people should learn. I think obviously start small, right? Most of us, I think, realistically shoot within 300 yards.
Yeah.
So push it out to 5. Learn the ballistics of your weapons platform as well.
Yeah.
Maybe your weapons platform can't reach 1,000 yards realistically with what you have.
Or a lot of people put blind trust. So they like, yeah, the guy who sold me this rifle said that he takes his and shoots it out distance all the time. So I know mine can, but they've never even
Right.
done it themselves. And then you find out that you have this massive spread of rounds.
Right.
And you're all over the place.
Well, think about back when we were at the shop, how many times people would come in and be like, "Oh, I'm looking for a rifle." Like, okay, cool. What do you want to do with it? Oh, I want to shoot 1,000+ yards. Okay, what
Yeah.
for? Like, what do you want to do? Like competition? Do you want to like what's your thought? Oh, hunting. It's like, homie, you ain't hunting jack at 1,000 yards. Don't lie to
Fuck
me.
no.
All
Dude,
right.
I don't even think you could walk 1,000 yards.
Yeah, it's like, homie, you want to be Chris Kyle, just own it. All right. It's like I'm gonna shame you. Just tell me you want to be able to shoot bad guys at 1,000 yards. Just say it,
Yeah.
But understanding that that's a whole skill set that comes into place, and we would have people come into the shop all the time that would be like, oh, I'm gonna buy this tricked out AR-10, and then I'm gonna feed it the cheapest, crappiest ammo I can find in the Amazon glass that'll go on top of it. That I got some $38, knockoff Xinjiang 1 to 10 scope that's got a laser and a flashlight on it. And that's going to be my setup,
Yeah.
right? And then you never shoot it past 100 yards, but you tell everybody, oh, I could reach out and hit 1,000, no problem.
Yeah.
Like the capability potentially is there of the rifle,
I feel
but
like
not.
any gun
Go
except for
ahead.
a 22, like, because Flat Old Danny proved it. You can't touch shit at 700 yards, bro.
I don't know, man. I mean, he was shooting pop cans at 700 yards, in South Dakota, or North Dakota, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But you factor in the wind and the dirt and
Yeah, the
discrimination.
dirt's a different material, so the bullet flew a little bit different.
Yeah, see, it was a Saturday and we always shot on Mondays.
I didn't have my morning Coke.
Yeah, I got to get my morning bump. But yeah, I think that's another big part of it too. Is knowing your weapons platform. And I know, for you and me in the military, we always had to learn what's the max effective range versus what's the max range of a weapons platform.
Yeah.
The difference being the max effective range is, in theory, the energy it will deliver being sufficient enough to do what it needs to do at a set distance. Generally, with an M4 was between the M4 and M16 was between 5 and 550 meters. So you understand that there's a set distance that past that, it's not saying it won't do anything, but it won't be as effective ballistically in theory on target.
Yeah. As well as accuracy playing into that. Yeah.
Right. As well as the max
MOA
range.
is going to be huge.
Yeah. This is also with irons, right? So then this is also then saying, your max range, though, is in theory, if you were to fire the bullet in a straight line with no outside factors, how long before it hits the ground, right? Mm-hmm. Which I believe is 1,800 meters, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Somebody somewhere is going to be somebody listening to this right now is just having an aneurysm at how wrong I probably am. And just well, actually.
The Marine Corps told me.
So yeah, so understanding the ballistics, and that's out of a 14.5 inch. That's what the 4 is. So If you have a 20-inch barrel, it's going to be different. If you have a 16-inch barrel, it's going to be different. Not by much, but by a little bit.
Especially
So
if you have
understanding,
yeah.
yeah, understanding that's another thing too, the type of ammunition. A lot of people have this idea that, especially like, you see like snipers in movies or whatever, right? That all you need is you just slap the glass on a rifle, load in the ammo, you know, adjust slightly off and to the left of the head, pull the trigger, hope for the best, right? Because you see some sniper movie, some dude does that where he like aims at him with the crosshairs and it's a perfect dead on hold at like 800 yards, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
When realistically, it's not like that, right? So the biggest thing is going to be, I think, one, learning your weapons platform and learning what weapons platform you want to use, right? So figuring out your weapons platform, then figuring out the type of optic you're going to run, what kind of glass are you going to do, and there's a big thing out there about the idea that you should be spending as much money on the glass as you did on the rifle, and part of that again, not necessarily that you have to drop $2,000 on glass because you bought a $2,000 rifle, but more to avoid the idea that you bought the cheapest scope possible on Amazon and it's got 4 different colors of optic, 3 different reticles, a laser light on it and a flashlight and a black light. That's got all this extra crap and it's just garbage.
Yeah.
And it's got the clarity of Helen Keller's eyeballs.
General rule of thumb, guys: if you can change the color of the red dot, it's an ass red dot.
Yes. If you can change the color of a reticle generally to anything other than one color, like if you have like I think of like the primary arms, right? For example, the reticle you can illuminate, right? If it turns more than one color, it's probably ass.
Yeah, if you can go from green to red, it's ass.
Yeah. Green, red. I've seen blue. If you look through the glass and it looks like there's black specks on it and it's brand new, not great. Not great at all. So
if it costs you $65, not great. Not great
yeah,
at all.
probably not a great option. So learning that like finding the scope you want and then learning the reticle as well. And learning like for example on mine, I've got the ACSS reticle primary arms 1-6. I can't remember the exact model that it is, but mine I've got kind of a Christmas tree for uh for gauging distances. So gauging distances, giving leads to be able to know like, hey, if my target is running to the left or running to the right at this distance, this is where I should be aiming to compensate for that. So learning your reticle, I think honestly, like not to toot SIG's horn because I'm not a big SIG fan, but I think one of the best things to help somebody learn this stuff out of the gate, if they have no idea and no one to teach them, is the BDX system from SIG is awesome for this.
Pretty fucking sick, dude.
Yeah. So what it'll do is it'll come with a laser rangefinder. You can connect to your app. It all Bluetooths to each other. So basically, you're looking. You laze the target at a set distance, and it figures out. Okay, it's this many yards away, and you can program into the app what type of load you're running.
And the wind.
So yeah, exactly. You can say it's 3 mile an hour in wind going left or right, and I'm shooting a 77 grain 5.56 round out of this inch barrel, right? It'll compute the data for you and figure out when you look through your crosshairs, it will illuminate a dot as to where you use that dot as your aim point, right? Instead of using the center of your crosshairs, basically put this dot on the target, pull the trigger. And it's super dumbed down, it's super simplified, and it does the whole process for you. So it's a great way to kind of learn those things if you can learn from seeing things like that and kind of figure it out mentally yourself as to what it's doing. If not, you kind of got to figure it out the hard way, right? Mm-hmm. So at certain distances, you definitely have to start accounting for wind a lot higher, and then the ammunition that you use. So you're using a 55 grain versus a 62 grain versus a 77 grain or 75 grain 5.56 round. They're all going to react differently to wind. They're all going to have different ballistics slightly. As far as, go ahead.
Yeah, different fall ratios, different everything.
Right, how they act at where they're going to. how far they're going to drop off and when. So these are important factors to consider when you're getting into this. Um, a big thing too is, looking at the big reason why 6.5 Creedmoor has been so popular versus 308. 308 for a long time was like that distance cartridge people would use for precision matches, or, well, unless they got like super specialized rounds, but a lot of people would use like the standard round that was just kind of run of the mill was 308. Well, 6.5 Creedmoor comes along, and basically the whole thing about it is it drops off later, it flies flatter, it's a more efficient cartridge that doesn't suffer from some of the deficiencies and doesn't suffer from wind
Dude,
as
someone's
much.
gonna have an aneurysm listening to you.
Oh, I know. Someone right
People,
now is just like,
why do
you're
people hate
talking with me.
people hate updating? People hate the future. They hate being out of the loop. Dude, people fucking despise 6.5, even though it's a solid fucking round.
Yeah, dude, some people just are not cool with the fact that there's a new cartridge and they're not in it.
Yeah, or they already have money invested into a different gun or a different platform, and it just pisses them off.
Right. No, and that being said, if you have mastered a platform, don't necessarily feel the need to switch, dude. If you're rocking an M1A with whatever optic setup and you can do that Springfield national match stuff where, you can just start dinging targets at 1,000 yards, no problem. That's dope. You've learned your rifle, right? There's not necessarily a need to switch. Could you get potentially better performance out of a 6.5? Probably. Do you need to? No. I mean, I think it's within the margin of error for what you're able to do. Um, but if you're getting into it for, newly getting into it, and you want like a larger caliber round, 6.5 Creedmoor is a pretty sweet way to go. And it's popular enough now, and it's been popularized and proven itself to work that it's not hard to find.
Not at all. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
everywhere.
it's not an obscure cartridge anymore.
It was
So that
actually super hard to find during COVID because so many people were getting into 6.5.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's
Um,
300 blackout as well on that one too, though. 300 blackout's pretty dope when you really break it down, but
yeah,
it does, like, a lot of people bitch and they're like, "Well, Michael, I have a sub gun or I have a 9 mil gun that does the same fucking thing as a 300 blackout with sub rounds," and I'm like, that's not the point. The fact is that you can do more with this 300 blackout on a ballistic standpoint than you can with that 9 mil.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's basically an Americanized AK cartridge.
yeah,
You
that's
know,
what it is.
so you're getting some very similar ballistics out of that. Um, but again, kind of going back to the long distance shooting thing, the other thing too is a lot of people have this idea that it's a very rich man's game. You got to have a lot of money invested in this, and the simple fact of the matter with that though is like really, really, you don't. Like
No, not at all.
you can. I mean, you can definitely get into the weeds and spend a ridiculous amount of money on it. But I mean, if you want to get started simple, I mean, how many times did you have guys come into the shop? I remember like dudes coming in and buying like a Savage or a Ruger American for under $800 and put some glass on it. Put some decent mid-level glass on it, get a bipod, and away they went. And
Yeah.
they were
Well, I
totally
mean, our boss, right? Super into long distance shooting. Like, he was like crazy into long distance shooting, right? And
yeah,
he would tell us all the time that, man, you know what's a solid fucking gun? Like a Stag, like a 308 Stag, like a super cheap AR-10.
yeah.
He's like, dude, that's it. Comes like what comes with it and what you're getting for the price you're paying is solid. Like, it's a solid fucking barrel, a solid manufacturing for dirt
You know,
cheap.
the Howas too. A Howa was a great option. I know we sold a bunch of those. They were, we usually had them for right around $1,000. They were kind of set up to be PRS, precision rifle shooting rifles, and really all you had to do is slap some glass on, maybe a bipod, and call it a day, and you were set.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. I think it's a big sleeper is on a lot of people is distance rifles. You think about too, just to get a little nerdy here. You think about when we think of like military heroes and stuff. Like what
Mm-hmm.
terrifies people the most is like the idea of like that sniper, right?
Yeah. A
Movies and all
sniper
kinds of
killing you
stuff.
from, yeah,
Yeah,
killing you from 1,000 yards away. Of course, it's
yeah.
terrifying, dude.
I mean, that's what I'm saying is like when you can have a dude who's popping bad guys off before you can even see what the hell's going on. Like that, there's a
That's a
certain level of intimidation factor.
that's a real life boogeyman.
Yeah, there's I talked about it on one of our earlier episodes about the books I read called Shock Factor, where this guy who was a Marine Corps sniper, he talked about the idea that it's a shock factor, right? When you and three of your buddies are walking along and one of them just turns into mist, there's
Yeah.
like a pucker factor that happens immediately to where he was like, look, you can have everyone fix bayonets and charge out of the trenches. And there's a certain expectation mentally that you're surrounded by other people and some of you aren't going to make it, but it's going to be a numbers game, right? They have to shoot thousands of you, right? And not every round means death, right? People are going to miss, right? But when you hear one round fired and then somebody drops, and then another round fired and another person drops, and you know that every time you hear the report of that rifle, one of you is dead, there's a shock factor involved.
Yeah.
There's something that mentally makes people stop in their tracks. And so having that capability, again, learning those distances, learning how to shoot at that distance gives you a big advantage to be able to, um, you know, overcome the deficiencies of not having machine gunners or a few other things. If you can do that kind of damage at a distance and not let the enemy get to you in the first place and harass at a distance and make them come through that to get to you, there's a lot to be said for that.
And not just the cringy, like, oh, I've got a distance rifle so I could kill tons of people, but actually being proficient in being a sniper, being quiet, being hidden, being, that scary thing because you're so good at it is what changes everything. It's not just having the rifle.
Absolutely. It's more than just learning how to shoot and being good at it. There's a lot more that comes into it. I think a good historical example of this is we all know the guy, hopefully, Simo Haya, the White Death, was a Finnish reservist who grew up in the woods, grew up hunting. Finland's got a big gun culture, has for a long time. The Russians invade in 1939. He gets called up, and this dude, literally with iron sights, right, and a Mosin, goes out, hides in the woods, wears all white, wears a white face mask, eats snow so he hides his breath, right, and kills. I think it was something upwards of almost like I think he's credited with like somewhere between 500 to 700 kills.
Yeah, the most kills ever recorded on record, right?
Yeah, I mean, and this guy was doing this with iron sights with a Mosin, you know, and just taking dudes out. And even if well, distance is a huge factor, like the marksmanship and accuracy fundamentals that you learn from shooting at distance, when you translate them over like that to, I'm sure some of those kills were not great distances, but you translate those skills over and makes you that much better of a marksman. You become a massively intimidating figure. I mean, this guy was able to hit and run like it's nobody's business. I mean, they had entire counter sniper teams running after this dude and just got murked by this guy because he knew his land, he knew the country, he knew his capabilities, and he struck fear into the heart of these people. I mean, you figured you have word about this guy going around, and you have a bunch of guys moving out in the open, and you hear boom, and a guy drops, and you hear boom again, another guy drops. You know it's him. You're terrified. No one wants to move because you think you're next. That's one man. That's
Yeah,
the
you
power.
don't know who. Yeah, he could be iron sights on you right now.
Right.
You would know.
That's the intimidation factor that one man can bring to that fight. So having us learning the capability to shoot at distance and getting that kind of capability, again, it comes down to one of those things that, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be that guy. You're not that guy, pal.
Yeah. You're not that guy, pal.
But if you have that capability, you become that much more of an asset. If you can't shoot past distance, there's always something we need to get better at, right? For me personally, I don't think I've ever really shot my personal rifle. Well, actually, realistically, I don't think I've really shot too much past 500 yards. So that's one thing that like I want to get better at, and I want to invest more time into. That's my next big thing, gun wise, is getting into distance shooting, because that is a skill set that I need to get better at. I'm pretty good at being able to figure stuff out within the ranges I've shot at, just from experience. But there's a lot of things I need to get better at. There's a lot of room for improvement. That's something I definitely want to build on, and something I think that we could make a lot better in the Minuteman community is getting that capability to shoot at distance. That doesn't necessarily mean we all need to go buy tricked out bolt action rifles and, get ready to rock and roll. But, even if it's just your AR and you have glass on it, Like extend your capability, push that out as far as you can do it, master it, and push it out further.
Oh, another thing on that is like people die, dude, right? So if everyone has a little bit of understanding on shooting distance, you can pick up that rifle and be deadly with it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the big thing is unlike professional militaries, us as Minutemen, um, we do not have the privilege and capability to rely on massive manpower pools to where, designated marksman's down. We'll pick up his rifle and get through this fight, but we need to get a new one when we get back. We don't have that capability, right? There's a
Yeah.
great post I saw about, I can't remember who posted it. I need to get better at that. Um, that ran some numbers and was like, you as a Minuteman cannot afford to take casualties. The idea that military operations involve acceptable casualties. Like how many men could we potentially lose and still be operational, right? Is this worth the risk? We don't have that capability. Even if you have, let's say, 20 people, which is a fairly significant size number of people for groups like us and for people listening.
That's a big number.
That is. Now, I know there are some people out there, I'm sure, that have maybe groups that are larger. A lot of them are going to have groups around 5 to 6. But let's say you're at 20. If you go out and one person dies, you lost a 20th of your fighting force.
Yeah.
You know, if
You are almost no longer effective as a fighting team if you
right,
lost that big guy too. You lost the land nav guy.
right. If 5 people die, you're down a fifth. I mean, my math is off on that.
I don't judge you, dude. I'm
But you know what
Asian.
I mean. You're down a good number of dudes. Like you are, on the verge of being non-operational just by losing a handful of guys. You lose 10, that's half. Okay, no, my math was right. Okay. So you lose 10 people, that's half. That's killed or wounded, right? At a certain
Yeah.
point, like you're not operational after a certain number of casualties, right? And you don't have the ability to tend a certain number of casualties. So engaging enemies at distance, creating that capability to where you can push them off before they can get to you or give you time to shoot, move, and maneuver, get that one dude at distance, maybe a second one, put the fear of God into him and dip the hell out, right? Reset somewhere else, do it again. There's a lot of studies you can look into this. The book Fry the Brain. You can look into the way the Chechens fought against the Russians in the early 90s. A lot of similar type of tactics where you have someone who has that capability engaging at distance, hitting and running. Another person set up in another location does the same thing. Eventually, where they think they start to think they're all around them, they can't escape them. There's a psychological factor that comes with the ability to shoot at distance that cannot be replaced. That is, I think, easier to replicate in a groups like ours than it is to replicate the machine gunner loadout.
Yeah. I mean, shit, there's people even during Vietnam War, right? That fucking American soldiers truly feared.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
some
absolutely.
jungle man, just some fucking 40-year-old man, right? Just sitting in his pajamas in the middle of a bush with a little fucking teacup in his hand. Like the fear of God can be put even into the biggest enemy by doing a little bit of damage that they cannot figure out.
Which again, it amazes me, like the ability psychologically to that has, like what one person with one round can do. One of the things I talked about in that book that I read, Shock Factor, that kind of just goes along with this. The early American sharpshooters, their idea was that to be considered for this, at 150 yards, you had to hit a man-sized target between the eyes with a musket, right? Or with the early rifles they had back then. That was your expectation, was with one shot you had to be able to hit it in between the eyes, right? The ability of these men was that at the Battle of New Orleans in 1814, the British officers were being gunned down by these sharpshooters. And the
Yeah.
British musketmen couldn't return fire accurately at the distances to counter them. So all these officers could do was stand there and take it.
Yeah, stand there and die.
Right. So if you think about like your standoff capability, potentially, let's say just against a bunch of dudes with ARs, is roughly 500 meters. If you can make a shot from 800, realistically, the likelihood of them hitting you, not high. If they've
Yeah.
only ever shot between 300 to 500 meters and you're an additional 300 meters further, right? Obviously, unless they have weapons platforms that can reach out that far. If we're talking about just dudes with ARs, right? The likelihood of you being able to hit to get them without any kind of recourse, a lot higher.
Yeah.
So distance, again, I think being your friend with this is that it's harder to replicate the machine gun concept to gain fire superiority in groups like this, and groups like the ones that we all train in. It's easier, I think, to replicate the distance capability, to replicate the DMR.
Yeah, especially since getting our hands on an actual heavy barreled fucking machine gun are pretty low in this country.
Right. And even if you want to come as close as you can with that, like, force reset trigger, heavy barrel AR, a bunch of stuff like this, the logistics that go into that it's just more of a hassle. Having multiple uppers or having a quick change barrel system, things like this that you have to have to make a machine gun operate properly, versus having a guy with a slightly better barrel, a little bit longer of a barrel, and some decent glass. It's a lot easier to replicate that than it is to replicate the machine gun side.
Yeah, or a 240, anything like that. Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot to be said for learning how to shoot at distance. I think it's one of those things that as you master your skills, and you feel very comfortable with your general purpose rifle, or you feel very comfortable with your standard AR setup, just start really pushing yourself and seeing how far you can push that accuracy, and learn your holds. Learn at how many yards, how many hundreds of yards out do you need to hold a little higher or a little lower, or whatever you're doing, right, to hit that target, and really focus in on that. And what limitations does your optic give you? If you have a red dot magnifier combo, realistically, how far out can you see?
Yeah.
If you have glass at full magnification, how far out can you see?
Or
Right?
the small things like, what is parallax? What does it do?
Yes.
Why does it affect my rounds?
Yes. Why, when you have parallax, when you have first or second focal plane optics, or something, well, honestly, that a lot of people don't spend enough time to do is learning your reticle. And this is going to sound really cheesy. What's a really good way to get an idea of what we're talking about with ballistics? You ever play Battlefield 4 as a sniper?
Yeah,
And
it's
you're trying
pretty
to,
good. It's pretty solid.
right, and you can literally watch the round travel, and they have realistic amounts of drop. So the reason you have hash marks on your optic is that at certain distances, because of the drop of the round, since bullets travel in an arc, you need to line up that second or third hash mark to make that shot. And if you want a really good visual representation of how to practice this, go play Battlefield 4 as a sniper and try to hit something at distance.
Or yeah, like but I mean, when you get super into it, that's when I start losing it, because like you need to know holds and weather and what different kind of temperatures affect the round, and like all sorts
Honestly,
of
though,
shit like that.
from again, our old boss we used to work with, the best advice he ever gave me, which I think is actually really interesting, and then one of the things I want to get into as well, the best way to practice long distance fundamentals without dumping ridiculous amounts of money into setting and getting like that perfect long distance rifle is 22 competitions. What he was saying is you'll have guys that will shoot 300 to 500 yards, with
Yeah.
22, like tricked out 22s, not like this 22 man crap from Grand. We're talking to like obviously specialized builds with optics, blah blah blah.
Yeah, like
Majority of it like 300-yard type stuff, but trying to get very accurate with something that's ridiculously messed with by wind, by all kinds of factors, and trying to get accurate with that.
yeah, because that'll teach you, if you learn on the hard platform, it'll teach you how to be better with the good one.
Exactly. So I think there's a lot to be learned from it. I think that you could definitely, there's a need for it. I think that is going to kind of become the next trend. I'm calling it now. You heard it here first, folks. I think that's going to be the thing that you start seeing is people trying to get into distance.
Think so, huh?
I think so. I think especially, unfortunately, as more, as you have states that get more restrictive, I know like that's kind of the pathway that you saw with Washington, is that more people started going towards distance rifles because they kept putting it off, right? They're like, no, I want to get all my tactical rifles now. I'll get distance stuff later. Bolt action rifles are still accessible. you know? So now people are getting into bolt action precision rifles and Matt starting to go that route because that's the new thing. That's one of the few things he can still get.
Yeah.
So I think you see more people start to get to that. I think that is going to be the kind of the next big thing is getting into the precision rifle world, learning how to shoot distance. As people kind of master the skills that they've learned, they're going to start needing something else, a new challenge, and that's going to be what I think you're going to see.
I hope so, because like honestly, it is super dope. It is really cool. I want to get into it myself, but I don't know. At the same time, I'm like, I don't really like we're talking like super far distance shooting and shit like that. I'm like, it's really cool to me, but at the same time, I kind of like lose a lot of interest in it. But I'm
I
sure a lot of people say it's an older man's game. Like the younger guys just want, I just want fucking machine guns and shit. That's what's cool as fuck. But like the older you get, the more you're like, you know what? Actually, this long distance shit's really fucking cool and it's time consuming. It's a lot of mathematics that go behind it.
I think there's something personally really rewarding when you hit a target at 800 yards plus.
Yeah,
you're like, dude, I can't even see the thing, and I smacked it. That's dope. I
yeah,
think it's certain things like that where it's like anytime you do something new for the first time and you're good at it, and you're like, holy crap, sick. Like the first time you sink a 3-pointer, you're like, oh,
I'm greatest of all time.
right? It's that kind of thing, right? I think there's a factor of that. I think it's also one of those things that you don't necessarily have to start at 1,000 yards. Like I said, take your rifle, push yourself, and push the rifle and learn what are its ballistic capability. Is it that your rifle can't hit a target at 500 yards, or that you can't hit a target at 500 yards?
Yeah, yeah.
Learn the difference.
What is it? And
So
also, it is really rewarding, like you said. Like if you can actually pick up a rifle and do something like that a lot of people cannot do, it's pretty impressive. It's cool. I mean, shit. I mean, even when you're shooting ARs and shit like that, it's super cool being able to smack targets in the A zone from fucking 200 yards. That's awesome. Like
yeah,
not everyone
yeah.
you go shooting with is able to do that.
I mean, you figure your average person is probably shooting at a range, unless they have a spot out in the woods, which sure. But your average person's probably shooting a distance of 1, maybe 200 yards on average. Realistically, a lot of them probably within 100 yards or less. A few instances where people might go out and occasionally shoot at distance, but again, it's a discipline. It's something that has to be learned. It's the you can learn how to shoot a rifle, and then you can learn how to shoot a rifle. It's that taking like that premium level,
Yeah.
going up to the premium level of marksmanship, going up to that next step. So I think that that's kind of something that if you feel like you're mastering what you're at, if you feel like you can go out and get an expert on a rifle qual for whatever agency or department or military or whatever, and you don't feel challenged, push it further, do the next thing. So I think that's kind of hopefully where people will start to go to is as we kind of go through cycles.
Yeah, as we always do.
Yeah. But yeah, man, I think there's a lot of cool things to look forward to, and I think that one of the things I like to look forward to is the mid-tier merch. You like my there?
I like that.
www.midtierthoughts.com. Check out our merchandise. Any and all proceeds go to helping us upgrade our kit and equipment to produce a better show for you.
Yeah, because I know that's what we all want. It's a super good show to sit here and listen to, and I know one of you's touching yourself, you sick fucks.
Obviously, like people like it. You guys keep coming back, which we are super grateful for and super humbled by. We want to produce better things for you. Unfortunately, that does require time and money, of which we don't have a whole lot of. So we do, we do appreciate your guys' support and do want to produce better things for you. We want to get into video as well, trying to find a good platform for that. Also, if you're listening to this and you know a good video platform to do podcast style stuff from, hit us up because we've experimented with a few, haven't quite necessarily worked out. That's why it's still audio. But if you know a good platform, whether it's free, whether it's something you paid for, whatever, or something that you guys use, let us know what that is. And we will try to experiment with that and see if we can get everything to work together. We really want to get into video. I think that's we're getting to a point where there's a lot of the stuff we would like to go over, some gear breakdowns, rifle breakdowns, things like this, some more visual stuff that we'd like to get into, and hopefully move a lot more of that over to our YouTube channel that we've kind of neglected for a while. And if anyone out there has any recommendations on stuff like that, please get a hold of us. Let us know. We want to produce better stuff for you.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I don't. I hate you guys, but Austin likes you.
I always love your little tidbits there. Where it's like, we sealed the deal, and you're like, actually, your mother's a shut up.
Yeah, 100%, dude. The better content we make for you guys, the better we feel about doing this. The more that we feel like what we're doing is actually paying off, and that you guys are really enjoying and stuff like that. So, just let us know, man.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. There's another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. Have a great one.
Later, man.